In the harsh wilderness of the Black Ridge Mountains, appearances can be fatally deceptive. When a ruthless band of land pirates decided to threaten a solitary farmer tending his isolated homestead, they had no idea they were about to awaken a ghost from the past that would systematically dismantle their entire criminal empire. This is the story of how one man's patience, when pushed beyond its limits, brought two rival syndicates to their knees in the valley town of Coleridge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air hung heavy with mountain mist as Isaac Thatcher worked the fertile soil of his isolated farm. Perched on a high plateau overlooking Coleridge Valley, the land was difficult to access, but rewarded honest labor with bountiful harvests. Thatcher's weathered hands moved with practiced precision, his movements economical and deliberate as he transplanted seedlings into perfectly spaced rows. From a distance, he appeared to be nothing more than a hard-working farmer, another pioneer trying to carve out an existence in the unforgiving terrain of the Blackridge territory. At 45, Thatcher's face was etched with lines that spoke of harsh winters and scorching summers. His beard, more salt than pepper, framed a face that rarely revealed emotion. Most noticeable were his eyes. Pale blue and unnervingly steady, they seemed to absorb everything while giving away nothing. Locals in Coleridge had grown accustomed to his monthly visits to trade vegetables and medicinal herbs, but few had ever heard him speak more than necessary, and fewer still knew anything about his past. The crack of twigs on the forest edge pulled his attention from the soil. Without appearing to notice, Thatcher registered the approach of riders, 4 men on horseback emerging from the tree line, their expressions suggesting they hadn't come for Thatcher's famous mountain potatoes. He continued working, his posture betraying nothing as they approached. "That's some mighty fine land you've got yourself tucked away up here," the lead rider called out. A tall man with a red bandana and a silver-plated revolver holstered ostentatiously on his hip. His name was Wesley Rattlesnake Reed, though Thatcher showed no sign of recognition. Reed was the self-appointed enforcer for Victor Harlan, who controlled the eastern side of Coleridge Valley through a combination of intimidation, violence, and corrupt alliances. Thatcher straightened slowly, wiping soil from his hands onto his worn canvas pants. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" His voice was surprisingly soft for a man of his stature, calm as still water. "Actually," Reed dismounted with theatrical flair, "we're here to help you." His smile revealed a gold tooth that caught the morning sunlight. "Victor Harlan sends his regards. He's mighty interested in acquiring this parcel for his new railroad venture." Thatcher's expression remained impassive. "Not interested in selling. Please leave my property." Reed's friendly demeanor faltered momentarily. The other riders shifted in their saddles, hands casually moving closer to their weapons. "Now see, that's not how this works. Mr. Harlan's offering fair compensation, $300, generous for a patch of dirt this remote." "This land's not for sale at any price," Thatcher replied, turning back to his seedlings. "Now, if you'll excuse me, these plants won't survive long out of soil." Reed's face darkened as he stepped closer, deliberately crushing a row of freshly planted seedlings under his boot. "Maybe I'm not making myself clear. This isn't an offer you get to refuse." The movement happened so quickly that Reed's men barely registered it. One moment Thatcher was crouched by his plants, the next he was standing with Reed's arm twisted behind his back, the enforcer's own knife pressed against his throat. The 3 mounted men fumbled for their weapons, but froze as Thatcher applied just enough pressure to draw a single bead of blood from Reed's neck. "I don't want trouble," Thatcher said, his voice still eerily calm, "but this is my home. I won't be threatened on my own land." With a swift movement, he disarmed Reed and pushed him away. Before any of the stunned men could react, Thatcher had already taken 3 steps back, holding the knife loosely at his side. The way he handled the blade, with the casual competence of someone who had used edged weapons professionally, gave the riders pause. "You've made a terrible mistake," Reed snarled, rubbing his throat. "Nobody refuses Harlan. Nobody. And nobody humiliates Rattlesnake Reed. We'll be back, farmer, and next time we won't be so cordial." As they rode away, Thatcher watched them, silently, his eyes tracking their movements until they disappeared into the forest. Only then did he return to his seedlings, carefully straightening those that Reed had trampled. His hands moved with the same calm precision as before, but something had changed in his bearing, a tightly coiled readiness that hadn't been visible earlier. Inside his modest cabin, Thatcher moved to a heavy oak chest in the corner of the room. He unlocked it with a key kept on a leather cord around his neck, revealing contents that would have shocked the residents of Coleridge. A matched pair of Remington revolvers with custom grips, a Winchester rifle with notches carved into its stock, several boxes of ammunition, and a folded leather document bearing the insignia of the United States Marshal Service. Beneath these lay a collection of newspaper clippings, yellow with age. The headlines told fragments of a story. "Legendary Marshal brings down Hawkins' gang. 12 outlaws dead in shootout with federal agent. Marshal Augustus Gray disappears after courthouse massacre." Accompanying the largest article was an illustration of a stern-faced lawman with a distinctive scar running from his left temple to his jawline, a feature hidden beneath Thatcher's beard but still visible if one knew where to look. The farmer, or rather, the man who had been pretending to be nothing more than a farmer, studied the weapons briefly before closing the chest and relocking it. He had hoped this day would never come. For 5 years, he had lived peacefully in his mountain refuge, leaving behind the violence that had defined his previous life. But he had not survived this long by ignoring warnings, and Reed's visit was more than that. It was a harbinger. In Coleridge, Reed and his companions tied their horses outside the Iron Horse Saloon, the unofficial headquarters of Victor Harlan's operations. Miners, lumberjacks, and townsfolk instinctively moved aside as Reed stormed through the bat-wing doors, his mood dangerous after the humiliation he had suffered. The Iron Horse was like most frontier saloons, a place where hard men sought brief respite from harder lives. The air hung thick with tobacco smoke, cheap whiskey, and desperation. In a private room at the back, Victor Harlan conducted the business that had made him the most feared man in the Eastern Valley. At 58, Harlan cultivated the appearance of a respectable businessman. His tailored suits and manicured hands projected an image at odds with the brutality that had built his empire. He had arrived in Coleridge 15 years earlier with nothing but ambition and a talent for identifying weaknesses in both people and systems. Now he controlled everything from mining rights to water access on the eastern side of the valley, with plans to expand westward, territory currently dominated by his rival Margaret Iron Lady Sullivan. He refused, Reed reported, still seething as he poured himself a generous glass of Harlan's private whiskey reserve. Harlan raised an eyebrow, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Refused? Or negotiated for a higher price? Refused outright. Reed downed the whiskey in one gulp. Said the land wasn't for sale at any price. Then he hesitated, the humiliation still fresh. "He what?" Harlan prompted, his voice dangerously soft. "He got the drop on me. Had my own knife at my throat before my boys could even clear leather." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "A simple farmer disarmed you, you who claims to be the fastest blade in the territory." Reed's face flushed with anger. There's nothing simple about him. The way he moved, it wasn't natural, cold as ice too. No fear in his eyes, like he's seen far worse than us. This detail seemed to interest Harlan more than the refusal itself. "Describe him." As Reed provided details about Thatcher's appearance and demeanor, something changed in Harlan's expression. He opened a drawer in his desk and removed an old folded wanted poster, spreading it carefully on the polished wood. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. "Is this him?" he asked, tapping a faded illustration. Reed studied the image, a stern-faced lawman with a distinctive scar. "Could be. Hard to tell with the beard. But the eyes... Yeah, those are his eyes all right. Cold as a mountain stream." Harlan sat back, a mixture of concern and calculation crossing his features. "Interesting. If I'm right, our reclusive farmer is none other than Augustus Gray, the marshal." Reed looked incredulous. "I thought he was killed years ago in that courthouse massacre." "Apparently not," Harlan mused. "This complicates things. Gray wasn't just any lawman. They called him the Ghost. 18 confirmed. Kills, all clean shots. Never wounded a bystander. Never failed to bring in his target, dead or alive." He drummed his fingers thoughtfully on the desk. "This changes our approach, but not our objective. That plateau is the key to controlling the mountain pass. Without it, Sullivan will continue blocking our access to the northern mines." "Want me to gather the boys? Pay another visit?" Reed asked, eager to redeem himself. Harlan shook his head. "Not yet. If this is truly Augustus Gray, storming his property would be suicide. We need to be more strategic. Perhaps leverage from another angle." Across town, in the newly constructed Sullivan Trading Company building, Margaret Sullivan received her own report of the incident from her chief of operations, a shrewd former cavalry officer named Harrison Cole. Unlike Harlan's theatrical menace, Sullivan projected calculated efficiency, dressed in practical attire that nonetheless conveyed authority and wealth. "Harlan's men were turned away by the plateau farmer," Cole reported, laying out a detailed map of the valley on Sullivan's desk. Apparently quite forcefully. Sullivan studied the map, her steel-grey eyes focused on the plateau that commanded the strategic mountain pass. At 42, she had built her empire through intelligence rather than brute force, though she wasn't above using the latter when necessary. Widowed at 25, she had transformed her late husband's struggling freight business into the dominant commercial power in the Western Valley through a combination of foresight, ruthlessness, and an uncanny ability to identify valuable assets before her competitors. "Interesting," she said, circling the plateau with a pencil. "Harlan's getting desperate if he's moving on Thatcher's land directly. That pass is the only viable route for his planned railroad connection." "There's more," Cole added. "My sources say Reed got himself humiliated, disarmed by the farmer in front of his own men. The way they describe it doesn't sound like the work of an ordinary homesteader." Sullivan's pencil paused mid-circle. "No, it doesn't." She opened a drawer and removed a leather-bound journal, flipping to a page of handwritten notes. "Isaac Thatcher. Arrived 5 years ago. Purchased the land legally from the previous owner, an old trapper who wanted to move south for his health. Keeps to himself, trades in town monthly, exceptional quality produce. Some locals claim his herbal remedies have medicinal properties superior to Dr. Patterson's treatments." She tapped the page thoughtfully. "Nothing in his behavior has suggested anything beyond an educated, skilled farmer. But I've always wondered, the plateau is defensible, commands a view of the entire valley, and has its own spring. Not the choice most farmers would make, difficult access, harsh winters. It's the choice someone might make if they valued security and isolation over convenience." Cole nodded in agreement. "My thoughts exactly. Should I arrange a meeting with him? A genuine offer might succeed where Harlan's intimidation failed." "Not yet," Sullivan decided. "Let's gather more information first. I want to know who Isaac Thatcher really is before I approach him. Send Elizabeth." Elizabeth Hayes was Sullivan's most valuable intelligence asset, a young widow who worked as a traveling herbalist, her unassuming appearance allowing her to move freely throughout the territory gathering information that men could never access. If anyone could unlock the mystery of Isaac Thatcher, it would be her. Back at Thatcher's farm, evening shadows stretched across the plateau as he completed his daily chores with the same methodical precision he applied to everything. To an observer, he might have appeared undisturbed by the morning's confrontation, but subtle changes betrayed his vigilance. The Winchester rifle propped by the door, previously kept inside, the careful scan of the horizon every few minutes, the strategic repositioning of tools that could double as weapons. As he prepared a simple dinner, a memory surfaced unbidden: the courthouse in Whiteridge 7 years earlier. The smell of gunpowder and blood, the screams of the innocent caught in the crossfire, the weight of failure as he realized too late that the Dawson brothers had infiltrated the jury. Augustus Gray had died that day in every way that mattered. Isaac Thatcher had been born from those ashes, seeking nothing more than quiet redemption through honest labor. But Reed's visit had shattered that illusion of peace. Sooner or later, Harlan or Sullivan would discover his true identity. The Valley's power struggle had finally reached his doorstep, and neutrality was no longer an option. The question wasn't whether violence would return to his life, but how soon and how completely. As darkness fell over the Blackridge Mountains, 3 separate forces began positioning their pieces on an invisible chessboard. In his cabin, Thatcher cleaned his Remingtons with the methodical care of someone renewing an old relationship. In his private room at the Iron Horse, Harlan dispatched riders to gather intelligence on the mysterious farmer. And in her office at the trading company, Sullivan pored over old newspaper clippings, piecing together the fragments of a legend everyone had believed was dead. By morning, Coleridge Valley would be buzzing with whispers about the farmer on the plateau. By noon, those whispers would reach the ears of men and women who remembered the name Augustus Gray, some with admiration, others with terror. And by nightfall, the careful balance of power that had defined the valley for years would begin its inevitable collapse, triggered by a confrontation that should never have happened on a remote mountain farm. As Thatcher extinguished his lamp and checked his defenses one final time, he glanced briefly at the chest containing his past. For 5 years, he had buried the man he once was beneath calluses and crop rotations, but some ghosts refused to stay buried, and the reckoning that was coming to Coleridge would require more than a farmer's hands to resolve. It would require the steady aim and unflinching resolve of the ghost, the lawman whose legend had been built on delivering justice when all other options had failed. Morning would bring visitors, some seeking alliance, others seeking his destruction. All of them would discover that the most dangerous man in the territory wasn't found in Sullivan's headquarters or Harlan's saloon, but in the solitary cabin overlooking the valley, where a farmer's hands concealed a gunman's deadly accuracy, and where patience, once exhausted, would give way to a precision that had once made Augustus Gray the most feared marshal in the Western Territories. The stage was set, the players were moving into position, and Isaac Thatcher, or Augustus Gray, stood at the center of a storm that would transform Coleridge Valley forever. Dawn broke over Coleridge Valley, painting the mountainsides in hues of amber and gold. In town, the daily rhythm of commerce had already begun, but beneath the routine transactions flowed currents of tension and speculation. Word of Reed's humiliation had spread like wildfire through saloons and boarding houses, transforming overnight into increasingly embellished accounts of the mysterious plateau farmer who had bested Harlan's feared enforcer. Outside Mercer's General Store, Elizabeth Hayes secured her medical satchel to her mare's saddle, her preparations watched with interest by the store's proprietor, Clara Mercer. Unlike most women in Coleridge, who wore their hardships like badges, Elizabeth maintained an appearance of gentle refinement that belied her sharp intellect and even sharper powers of observation. "Heading up to the plateau, then?" Clara asked. handing Elizabeth a small package of coffee beans. "On Sullivan's business, I imagine." Elizabeth accepted the package with a smile that revealed nothing. "Mr. Thatcher's lavender tincture worked wonders for my headaches. Thought I'd see what other remedies he might recommend." Her voice carried the soft lilt of Eastern education, another tool in her arsenal of disarming qualities. Clara leaned closer, lowering her voice. "They're saying he's not what he seems. Harlan's men have been asking questions all morning, offering drinks to anyone with information." "People love their stories," Elizabeth replied dismissively, though she filed away this confirmation of Harlan's increased interest, especially in towns like this. As she mounted her horse, Sheriff Mills emerged from his office across the street, his expression troubled as he intercepted her path. "Miss Hayes," he nodded respectfully, his hand resting casually on his belt near his holster. "Beautiful morning for a ride." At 53, Sheriff Thomas Mills was a study in compromise, a man who had maintained order in Coleridge primarily by knowing when to look the other way. His loyalties divided pragmatically between Harlan and Sullivan, based on which side offered the day's advantage. He had survived by being useful to both while threatening neither. "Indeed it is, Sheriff," Elizabeth replied pleasantly. "Perfect. Weather for collecting mountain herbs. Heading up to Thatcher's place, I hear," Mills continued, his casual tone at odds with the intensity of his gaze. "Might not be the best day for it. There's talk of trouble brewing." Elizabeth adjusted her riding gloves. "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff, but Mr. Thatcher has always been a perfect gentleman in our dealings." Mills stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Listen carefully, Miss Hayes. Something's changed. Last night, Jenkins at the telegraph office received messages from 3 different territories asking about Thatcher's description. This morning, Harlan's offering $50 for information, and Sullivan's people are suddenly very interested in old newspaper archives." Elizabeth's practiced smile never wavered, though her mind raced with the implications. "Thank you for your concern, Sheriff. I'll be sure to exercise appropriate caution." As she rode out of town, Elizabeth noted the unusual number of armed men visible on both sides of the main street. Harlan's enforcers lounging with deliberate casualness outside the saloon, Sullivan's security personnel conducting suspiciously thorough equipment checks at the trading company. The tension was palpable, like the charged air before a lightning storm. The trail to Thatcher's plateau grew steeper and narrower as it wound through dense pine forest. Twice Elizabeth spotted signs of recent passage, fresh hoofprints, a discarded cigar still smouldering, indications that others had already made the journey this morning. She adjusted the small derringer hidden in her sleeve, a precaution that had saved her life more than once during her work for Sullivan. When she finally crested the ridge that opened onto Thatcher's plateau, Elizabeth was surprised to find the farmer already had a visitor. A weathered wagon stood near his cabin, bearing the distinctive red cross of Dr. Samuel Patterson. The town physician was engaged in animated conversation with Thatcher near the well, both men turning at her approach. "Miss Hayes," Thatcher acknowledged her with a subtle nod, his posture shifting almost imperceptibly, a movement she recognized as defensive readiness. "Mr. Thatcher," she dismounted gracefully. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Dr. Patterson interjected, his normally jovial demeanor subdued. "I was just discussing herbal alternatives with our talented farmer here. His knowledge of medicinal plants is quite remarkable." Elizabeth didn't miss the tension vibrating between the two men, nor the way Patterson's medical bag sat open on the ground nearby, a corner of what appeared to be an old wanted poster visible. "Among the bandages and tinctures. How fortunate to find you here, Doctor," she said. "I've been experiencing those troublesome headaches again. Perhaps you both could recommend a treatment." "Willow bark tea, steeped with lavender and a pinch of rosemary," Thatcher offered, his eyes never leaving her face. "Though something tells me your visit isn't primarily about headaches, Miss Hayes." Patterson cleared his throat awkwardly. "I should be getting back to town. Miners' Appreciation Day tomorrow means plenty of injuries to tend." He gathered his bag, carefully tucking away the visible paper. "Think about what I said, Isaac. Some secrets are too dangerous to keep, especially with tensions rising in the valley." As Patterson's wagon rumbled away, Elizabeth found herself alone with Thatcher, acutely aware that she was being assessed by eyes that missed nothing. "Your employers must be very interested in my farm if they're sending their best intelligence gatherer," Thatcher remarked casually, gesturing toward his cabin. "Would you care for some tea while we discuss why Margaret Sullivan has suddenly taken such interest in my property?" Elizabeth concealed her surprise at his direct approach. Few people in the valley understood her true role in Sullivan's organization. "You seem well informed for someone who rarely comes to town." The interior of Thatcher's cabin was a study in practical simplicity, clean, organized, with furniture he had clearly built himself. Yet certain details stood out to Elizabeth's trained eye. The strategic placement of the chairs offering clear views of all entrances, the unusual thickness of the window shutters, the way every tool hung within easy reach while leaving movement paths unobstructed. This was not just a farmer's home. It was a defensible position designed by someone who understood tactical advantage. "Chamomile with honey," Thatcher said, placing a steaming cup before her. "Better for tension than willow bark." "Are we experiencing tension, Mr. Thatcher?" Elizabeth asked, accepting the cup. A ghost of a smile touched Thatcher's lips. "You're here to assess whether Augustus Gray is worth Sullivan's protection or elimination. Dr. Patterson came to warn me that Victor Harlan has recognized my description from old wanted posters. And somewhere on the North Ridge, 3 of Harlan's men are watching this cabin through field glasses, waiting for you to leave." He sipped his tea calmly. "I'd call that tension, wouldn't you?" The directness of his statement momentarily stripped away Elizabeth's practiced facade. "You've known all along who I really work for. Just as I know Sheriff Mills plays both sides, Clara Mercer reports to Harlan, and Dr. Patterson once served as a battlefield surgeon alongside a young marshal who helped him evacuate a military hospital during the Henderson County War." Thatcher set down his cup. "Small towns have big ears, Miss Hayes, and I've had 5 years to listen." Elizabeth studied him with new respect. "If you're truly Augustus Gray, why here? Why farming of all things?" Something darkened in Thatcher's expression. "Have you ever killed a man, Miss Hayes?" "No, I have. 27 that I'm certain of. Each one justified by law, each one necessary by circumstance, and each one taking a piece of my soul that I'll never get back." He gestured toward the window, where rows of thriving crops stretched toward the forest edge. "Plants don't bleed. They don't leave widows and orphans. They don't haunt your dreams with their dying words." The raw honesty of his response caught Elizabeth off guard. For years, she had operated in a world of half-truths and calculated deceptions, her value to Sullivan measured by her ability to extract information while revealing nothing. Yet here was a man laying bare the core of his being with disarming simplicity. "Margaret Sullivan believes your land is essential to preventing Harlan from establishing rail access to the northern mines," she said, deciding to match his honesty with her own. "But after this morning's information, I suspect she's more interested in you than your property." "And what information would that be?" "Telegrams from 3 territories confirming Augustus Gray disappeared after the White Ridge Courthouse massacre. Presumed dead, witness descriptions matching your appearance, and rumors that the legendary Ghost once single-handedly prevented a massacre at Crescent Valley during the Henderson County War by infiltrating the Dawson Gang." Thatcher's expression revealed nothing, but Elizabeth noticed his hand momentarily, more tensing around his cup. "You know what happened at White Ridge," he said softly. "It's not taught in Eastern schools." 7 civilians killed when the Dawson brothers attempted to free their youngest sibling during his trial, Elizabeth recited. The presiding marshal was badly wounded but managed to kill 4 of the attackers before disappearing. Official reports listed him among the dead. Official reports, Thatcher echoed, a bitterness in his voice that spoke of deeper wounds than physical scars. Do they mention that 3 of those civilians were children, or that the marshal had assured their mother? The courthouse was safe? He stood abruptly, moving to stare out the window. Augustus Gray died in that courthouse. The man who walked out was somebody else entirely. The raw pain in his voice stirred something in Elizabeth that professional detachment couldn't suppress. For a moment, she saw beyond the mission Sullivan had sent her to accomplish, glimpsing instead the broken man beneath the farmer's calluses and the marshal's legend. Mr. Thatcher, or Marshal Gray, if you prefer. Thatcher, he interrupted firmly. Gray is dead. Mr. Thatcher, then. You should know that Victor Harlan has put out calls to several known bounty hunters. Word in town is that he's offering $500 for proof of your identity and another $500 for your elimination. Thatcher turned from the window, his expression hardening. And Sullivan, what is she offering? Protection, Elizabeth said, in exchange for an alliance against Harlan. A dry, humorless laugh escaped him. The Valley powers choosing sides. With me as the prize, he shook his head. I didn't survive this long by becoming another man's weapon, Miss Hayes. Even if refusing means Harlan's men will come for you? They'll come regardless, Thatcher replied with calm certainty. The question is whether Sullivan's offer is truly protection or simply a more elegant cage. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching horses, multiple riders moving fast up the trail from town. Thatcher moved with startling speed to the window, his relaxed demeanor instantly replaced by focused alertness. 6 riders, he reported grimly. Not Harlan's regular men. These are strangers, likely the bounty hunters you mentioned. Elizabeth joined him at the window, alarm racing through her. They're early. Our intelligence suggested they wouldn't arrive until tomorrow at the earliest. Harlan's not waiting. Thatcher moved to the oak chest in the corner, unlocking it swiftly. You need to leave through the back trail. It connects to the eastern. Pass about 3 miles down. I'm not leaving you to face 6 gunmen alone, Elizabeth protested, surprising herself with the realization that she meant it. Thatcher removed the matched Remingtons from the chest, checking them with practiced efficiency. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when Harlan decided to accelerate his timeline, she countered, drawing her derringer from its hidden sleeve compartment and a more substantial revolver from beneath her riding skirt. Besides, I'm as trapped as you are. Those men will have secured the main trail. Thatcher paused, reassessing her with new eyes as she competently checked her weapons. Sullivan's intelligence gatherer is also her covert operative, I see. We all have our secrets, Mr. Thatcher, she replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. I was Sullivan's personal bodyguard before I was her spy. Top of my class at Pinkerton's female operative training program. For the first time, a genuine smile crossed Thatcher's face. Well, Miss Hayes, it seems we're both more than we appear. He handed her a box of ammunition. Take position by the root cellar doors. They offer cover and a clear line of sight to the approach trail. The riders were visible now, dust rising behind them as they climbed the final stretch toward the plateau. They moved with the coordinated precision of men accustomed to violence, spreading out to approach the cabin from multiple angles. They're professionals, Thatcher observed grimly, positioning himself near the front window. Former military, by their formation. Elizabeth checked the revolver's chamber one final time. Dawson's marauders. Harlan hired them last year to clear out competing mining claims in the North Valley. They're efficient and utterly without mercy. Thatcher's expression darkened at the name. Dawson. Any relation to the brothers from Whiteridge? Cousins, Elizabeth confirmed. which means this isn't just business for them. It's personal. A cold, dangerous focus settled over Thatcher's features, something ancient and predatory that transformed the quiet farmer into someone else entirely. Elizabeth suddenly understood why they had called him the Ghost during his martial days. There was something otherworldly in his stillness, a deadly calm that seemed to bend the very air around him. "Miss Hayes," he said quietly, "whatever happens, in the next few minutes I need you to remember something important." "What's that?" His pale blue eyes met hers with unsettling intensity. "I never wanted to kill again. Whatever I do today, I do because they've left me no choice." The lead rider, a scarred man with a distinctive black duster, raised his hand to halt the others about 50 yards from the cabin. His voice carried clearly in the mountain air. "Augustus Gray, we know you're in there. Victor Harlan sends his compliments and an offer. Come out peaceful-like, and the woman rides away unharmed. Resist, and we burn this place to the ground with both of you inside." Thatcher's expression never changed, but something subtle shifted in his stance. A coiled readiness that reminded Elizabeth of a mountain lion preparing to strike. "Nathan Dawson," Thatcher whispered, identifying the leader, "mastermind behind the Silver Spur train robbery, wanted in 4 territories." His voice hardened. "And the man who shot the youngest victim at White Ridge." Before Elizabeth could respond, Thatcher raised his voice to address the bounty hunters. "The woman is a visitor, with no part in this. Let her ride out, and we can discuss terms." Dawson's laugh was cruel and confident. "No terms to discuss, Ghost. Harlan wants your head, and I want revenge for my cousins. But I'm feeling generous today. Send out the woman, and I'll make your death quick." Elizabeth positioned herself behind the root cellar doors, her revolver trained on the riders. 6 against 2, she murmured. Not ideal odds. For the first time, something like grim amusement flickered across Thatcher's face. "Actually, Miss Hayes, when I was the Ghost, these would have been considered favourable odds." He glanced at the position of the sun, calculating angles and shadows. "When I give the signal, aim for the rider on the far left. Don't kill him. Wound him in the shoulder or arm. We need the distraction. And what will you be doing?" The transformation was complete now. Isaac Thatcher had receded entirely, replaced by the deadly efficiency of Augustus Gray, the lawman whose name had once made hardened criminals surrender rather than face him. "What I've spent 5 years trying to forget," he answered softly, becoming the Ghost once more. As the bounty hunters prepared their attack, tension crackled across the plateau like summer lightning. The peaceful farm had become a battlefield, and the farmer had become a weapon, one that the approaching killers, despite their confidence, were utterly unprepared to face. Time seemed to slow as Nathan Dawson gave the signal for his men to advance. The bounty hunters moved with the synchronized precision of men who had hunted together before, spreading out to approach the cabin from multiple angles. 2 dismounted to flank the structure, while 3 others maintained mounted positions, rifles ready. Dawson himself remained centered on the trail, a double-barreled shotgun resting casually across his saddle. Inside the cabin, Thatcher's breathing had settled into the controlled rhythm that had once been as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. "On my signal," he murmured to Elizabeth, his voice eerily calm as he gauged distances and angles. "Remember, left shoulder of the man in the brown vest. When he falls, the others will instinctively look his way. That's our window." Elizabeth steadied her revolver, surprised at how steady her own hands were in the face of such overwhelming odds. "Ready," Thatcher counted down silently, his lips barely moving. 3, 2, 1. "Now." Elizabeth's shot cracked through the morning air with startling precision, catching the designated rider high in the shoulder and sending him tumbling. in from his horse with a cry of pain and surprise. In the split second of confusion that followed, Thatcher moved. Later, Elizabeth would struggle to describe what she witnessed. One moment Thatcher was beside her in the cabin, the next he was somehow at the corner of the building, both Remingtons drawn. His first two shots came so close together they sounded like a single report, dropping the flanking men before they could register his presence. His third shot disabled Dawson's shotgun, splintering the stock and sending fragments into the bounty hunter's face. The remaining mounted men recovered quickly, returning fire with practiced efficiency. Bullets splintered wood around Thatcher, but he had already moved again, seeming to anticipate their aim before they fired. Another series of precisely placed shots emptied two more saddles. 5 men down in less than 10 seconds, with not a single fatal wound, each incapacitated by shots to shoulders, arms, or legs. Only Dawson remained effective, having drawn his sidearm after losing the shotgun. The bounty hunter leader dove from his horse into the cover of a water trough, cursing viciously as he wiped blood from the wooden splinters that had struck his face. "That's the ghost, all right," he shouted to his disabled companions. "No one else shoots like that. Harlan didn't say anything about facing Augustus Grey himself." Elizabeth maintained her position, covering the downed men to prevent any from recovering enough to rejoin the fight. She watched in astonishment as Thatcher moved like liquid shadow around the periphery of the clearing, his footfalls silent, his presence registered only when he chose to be seen. "It's over, Dawson," Thatcher called, his voice coming from a direction that confused even Elizabeth. "Your men are down. You're outmatched. Surrender now and you all ride out alive." "The hell I will." Dawson's response was punctuated by wild shots in Thatcher's general direction. "You killed my cousin's ghost. I've waited 7 years for this." "Your cousins died because they murdered innocent people," Thatcher replied, his voice now coming from a completely different position. "Children, Dawson. They shot children. Collateral damage," Dawson snarled, firing again at the source of Thatcher's voice, hitting nothing but air. "You think you're better than us? You've got just as much. Blood on your hands!" A terrible stillness settled over the clearing. Even the wounded men seemed to hold their breath. "You're right." Thatcher's voice had changed, something ancient and cold entering it. "The difference is whose blood and why." The shot that followed seemed to materialize from nowhere, striking Dawson's gun hand with surgical precision. The bounty hunter's weapon went flying as he clutched his bleeding hand to his chest, his face contorted with pain and rage. Thatcher emerged from the shadows behind the water trough, both Remingtons trained on Dawson's head. 7 years ago, you ordered your cousins to create a distraction during the courthouse escape. You told them to shoot into the crowd." His voice was deadly quiet. "A 12-year-old girl died in her mother's arms because of that order. I've thought about that girl every day since." Fear replaced the defiance in Dawson's eyes as he realized how completely he had miscalculated. "Harlan will send more men," he stammered. "Kill me, and you'll never know peace." "I haven't known peace since Whiteridge," Thatcher replied, though something shifted in his expression. After a long moment, he lowered one of his weapons. "But killing you won't bring that girl back." Elizabeth emerged cautiously from her position, keeping her weapon trained on the wounded bounty hunters. "What now?" Thatcher's gaze never left Dawson. "Now we need answers, starting with how Harlan knew who I was and why he's suddenly so desperate to eliminate me." Within the hour, the bounty hunters had been disarmed, their wounds tended with Thatcher's surprising medical skill. Bound securely but not cruelly, they sat under Elizabeth's watchful eye while Thatcher methodically questioned Dawson. "Harlan received a telegraph 3 days ago," the bounty hunter revealed reluctantly, wincing as he adjusted his bandaged hand. "Don't know who sent it, but afterward he was like a man possessed. Sent riders in every direction, called in every favor, said the plateau had to be secured immediately, no matter the cost." "The timing doesn't make sense," Elizabeth interjected. "Harlan's been interested in this land for months. Why the sudden urgency?" Dawson sneered at her. "You think Harlan tells hired guns his business strategy? All I know is he specifically mentioned the ghost, said making sure it was you was worth an extra 100. He spat on the ground. Should have asked for 1,000, knowing what I know now." Thatcher's expression remained impassive, but his mind was working with the focused clarity that had once made him the most feared lawman in the territories. 3 days ago, he mused. The same day the territorial governor's representatives arrived in Kingston to investigate mining claims. Elizabeth's eyes widened with sudden understanding. The Northern Pass. It's not just about rail access. It's about what's being transported. She turned to Dawson. "What's coming through the valley? What shipment is Harlan expecting?" Before Dawson could answer, the distant sound of galloping hooves drew their attention. A lone rider was approaching at breakneck speed from the direction of town. Not another bounty hunter, but the unmistakable figure of young Jimmy Porter, Clara Mercer's assistant from the general store. Thatcher moved to intercept the boy, who reined his horse to a frantic halt, his face flushed with exertion and fear. "Mr. Thatcher," the boy gasped, "Dr. Patterson sent me. There's trouble in town, big trouble. Sullivan's men and Harlan's are shooting up the place. The trading company's on fire, and they've taken Sheriff Mills hostage at the Iron Horse." Thatcher's expression darkened as he helped the exhausted boy from his horse. "Slow down, Jimmy. Tell me exactly what happened." Between gulps of water from the canteen Elizabeth provided, Jimmy related the chaos that had erupted in Coleridge shortly after Elizabeth's departure. According to the boy, tension had been building all morning, with armed men from both factions taking increasingly aggressive positions throughout town. The spark came when one of Sullivan's security men was caught supposedly tampering with the Iron Horse's water supply. "Mr. Harlan accused Miss Sullivan of trying to poison him," Jimmy explained. "Her man said he was just getting a drink, but Reed shot him anyway, right there in the street. After that, everybody started shooting. The trading company got hit with coal oil lamps, and Sullivan's brother got wounded. Then Harlan's men grabbed the sheriff when he tried to stop it." Thatcher exchanged a significant look with Elizabeth. The timing was too convenient, chaos erupting just as bounty hunters arrived at the plateau. "Where's Dr. Patterson now?" "Treating wounded at the church," Jimmy replied. "Said to tell you." He hesitated, glancing nervously at Elizabeth. "Said to tell you that it's happening again. Just like Cameron County. He said you'd understand." A muscle tightened in Thatcher's jaw, the only visible sign of the impact those words had on him. "I understand." He turned to Elizabeth. "This was orchestrated. The attack here, the violence in town, it's all connected." Elizabeth holstered her weapon, her professional demeanor reasserting itself. "Sullivan wouldn't have authorized this. Something's wrong." She moved toward her horse with sudden purpose. "I need to get back." "Into a war zone?" Thatcher questioned. "That's exactly what someone wants." "My duty is to Miss Sullivan," Elizabeth replied firmly, though conflict was evident in her expression. "If she's in danger, she's not the target," Thatcher interrupted, the pieces suddenly falling into place in his mind. "Neither is Harlan. This is about destabilizing the entire valley." He turned to Jimmy. "Boy, did you see any strangers in town before the shooting started? People who aren't with Sullivan or Harlan?" Jimmy frowned in concentration. "Now that you mention it, there were some men at the telegraph office this morning, city types in fancy suits. Someone said they were from the Territorial Land Office, or pretending to be," Thatcher muttered. He strode to his cabin, returning moments later with the Winchester rifle and a leather saddlebag. "The Cameron County Land War," he explained to Elizabeth. 7 years ago, 2 rival ranching families destroyed each other over water rights. By the time the smoke cleared, both families were dead, and a mining consortium that nobody had noticed had secured all the contested land for pennies on the dollar. Understanding dawned in Elizabeth's eyes. You think the same thing is happening. Here, someone's manipulating Harlan and Sullivan into destroying each other. It fits the pattern, Thatcher confirmed, checking his ammunition. The sudden urgency, the coordinated violence, the presence of officials from the territorial office right when chaos erupts. He secured the saddlebag to his horse. Whoever's behind this needed me out of the way first. They clearly know my history of stopping exactly these kinds of operations. Dawson laughed bitterly from his position among the other restrained bounty hunters. So Harlan's being played? That'll sit well with him. The question is by whom? Elizabeth mused. And why now? Thatcher's expression was grim as he mounted his horse. I intend to find out. He looked at Jimmy. Ride to the Chambers Ranch on the South Valley. Tell Tom Chambers what's happening and have him bring his men to town. He's no friend to either Harlan or Sullivan, but he won't stand for outside manipulators. What about us? Dawson called, indicating himself and his wounded men. Arrived 2 days ago, Patterson confirmed. Claimed to be from the Territorial Land Office, investigating disputed mining claims. Very interested in the plateau property and the Northern Pass. Asked a lot of questions about you, Thatcher. He wiped his brow, leaving a smear of someone else's blood across his forehead. After the shooting started, they disappeared, but their horses are still at the livery. They're waiting, Thatcher concluded, letting Sullivan and Harlan weaken each other before they make their move. He unfolded a small map from his pocket, spreading it on a side table. Show me exactly where everyone is positioned. As Patterson marked the locations of various factions on the crude map, Elizabeth studied the wounded through the vestry doorway. Civilians caught in the crossfire, she murmured, just like Whiteridge. Something shifted in Thatcher's expression. At those words, a cold determination replacing the calculating tactician. Not this time, he stated with quiet intensity. History isn't going to repeat itself today. Patterson finished marking the map, then reached into his medical bag, removing a sealed envelope. This came for you yesterday, care of my office. Special courier from the territorial capital. He handed it to Thatcher. I think you should read it before you decide what to do next. Thatcher broke the official seal, his expression growing increasingly grave as he read the contents. Without a word, he handed the letter to Elizabeth, who scanned it quickly. Is this genuine? She asked Patterson, her voice carefully controlled. The courier had proper credentials, the doctor confirmed. Said it was priority from the governor. Himself? Thatcher folded the letter, tucking it inside his jacket. His face had settled into an expression of absolute resolve, the look of a man who has made a decision from which there is no turning back. It changes everything, he said, quietly. And nothing. He checked his weapons methodically. We need to get to Sheriff Mills first. Once he's secure, we'll deal with Sullivan and Harlan. How? Patterson asked incredulously. Reed's men have the street covered. You'll be cut down before you get halfway there. A hint of the old ghost emerged in Thatcher's cold smile. They're watching the streets, Doc, but in my experience, most men forget to look up. He turned to Elizabeth. Are you with me? This goes beyond your duty to Sullivan. Elizabeth met his gaze steadily, her decision already made. I'm with you, Marshal. As they prepared to depart, a wounded miner called out from his pew, his voice slurred with pain, and Dr. Patterson's laudanum. Is it true? Are you really him? The ghost? Thatcher paused at the church door, looking back at the room full of injured. Civilians, casualties of a conflict manufactured by unseen forces for unspeakable profit. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a vow. Today I am. Dusk settled over Coleridge, painting the smoke-filled sky in hues of amber and ash. From their vantage point in the church's bell tower, Thatcher and Elizabeth surveyed the embattled town through Dr. Patterson's brass spyglass. The once bustling main street had become a war zone, with makeshift barricades dividing territory between Harlan's men at the western end and Sullivan's remaining forces clustered around the damaged trading company building to the east. 3. Sharpshooters on the rooftops, Thatcher noted, his voice barely above a whisper as he identified threats with practiced precision. 2 more in the second-floor window of the assay office. They've established interlocking fields of fire covering all approaches to the Iron Horse. Elizabeth studied the territorial map they'd spread on the dusty floor of the bell tower, marking positions with a piece of charcoal. Sullivan's position is equally fortified. Her brother William has positioned men here, here, and here. She indicated several buildings surrounding the trading company. But they're pinned down. No way to mount an effective counterattack with those sharpshooters in place. They're at a stalemate, Thatcher concluded, exactly as our mystery manipulators intended, bleeding each other dry while whoever sent that false telegram waits to step in and claim the spoils. He folded the spyglass, his expression hardening. But first they need the plateau secured. Without control of the northern pass, the rest is worthless. The letter from the governor changes everything, Elizabeth said, removing the document from her inside pocket. Special Territorial Investigator Augustus Gray, authorized to investigate corruption in mining claim disputes. She studied Thatcher's face in the fading light. You never truly retired, did you? This was an assignment all along. Thatcher's laugh held no humor. The irony isn't lost on me. 5 years living as a farmer, trying to escape who I was, only to discover the governor deliberately placed me here as a sleeper agent in case of exactly this scenario. He took the letter back, tucking it securely in his jacket. I meant what I told you about Whiteridge. I did leave the Marshal Service, but apparently some people in the territorial capital never accepted my resignation. The church bell above them tolled 6 times, the sound reverberating through the smoky air. On cue, a new wave of gunfire erupted near the saloon as Reed's men used the noise as cover to advance their position. Time's running out, Elizabeth observed. If we're going to reach Sheriff Mills, it needs to be now, while they're focused. On Sullivan's western barricade, Thatcher nodded, checking his Remingtons one final time. The weapons felt disturbingly familiar in his hands, as though the 5 years of farming had never happened. Remember the plan. We use the rooftops to approach the Iron Horse from behind. I'll create a distraction while you extract Mills. If I'm not at the rendezvous point in 20 minutes, I'm not leaving without you, Elizabeth interrupted firmly. Something shifted in Thatcher's expression, surprise followed by a grudging appreciation. 20 minutes, he repeated, then you get Mills to safety regardless. They descended from the bell tower silently, using the growing darkness as cover. Dr. Patterson waited below with supplies, extra ammunition, a coil of rope, and a small medical kit. The wounded are stable for now, the doctor reported in hushed tones. But we're running low on everything. Water, bandages, laudanum. If this doesn't end soon. It ends tonight, Thatcher assured him, the quiet certainty in his voice seeming to calm the exhausted physician. One way or another. Patterson gripped Thatcher's arm. Be careful, old friend. The Dawsons were dangerous, but at least you knew what motivated them. Whoever's manipulating this situation is operating on a different level entirely. That's precisely why they've underestimated me, Thatcher replied, a cold smile touching his lips. They think they're hunting a retired lawman. They don't realize they've awakened the ghost. Moving like shadows, Thatcher and Elizabeth slipped through the church's rear exit and into the maze of narrow alleys behind Coleridge's main buildings. Years of mountaineering served Thatcher well as he led them up a rain barrel to the flat roof of the Mercantile, establishing the first leg of their rooftop path toward the Iron Horse. They moved in synchronized silence, communicating with hand signals as they navigated from building to building. Twice they froze as Reed's men passed beneath them, oblivious to the figures moving overhead. Elizabeth matched Thatcher's pace expertly, confirming his suspicions that her training went far. Beyond simple intelligence gathering, Pinkerton's finest indeed, he murmured appreciatively as she executed a challenging leap between buildings without hesitation. 3 rooftops from the Iron Horse, they encountered their first major obstacle, a gap too wide to jump, with Harlan's men visibly patrolling the alley below. "Now what?" Elizabeth whispered, surveying the 15-foot chasm separating them from their objective. Thatcher unwound the rope from his shoulder, quickly fashioning a grappling hook from components in his saddlebag. "Sometimes the direct approach is best," he explained, testing the hook's security. "Watch the alley. When the patrol passes, I'll secure our crossing." As soon as the guards below moved out of sight, Thatcher swung the improvised grappling hook across the gap, securing it to a chimney on the opposite roof. With practiced efficiency, he created a rope bridge, motioning for Elizabeth to cross first. "Ladies first," she questioned with a raised eyebrow. "The second crosser has the more dangerous position," he countered. "You've proven your courage already, Miss Hayes." Something unspoken passed between them, a mutual recognition of respect earned through shared danger. Elizabeth crossed swiftly, her movements graceful despite the precarious setting. Thatcher followed, retrieving the rope before continuing their approach. The rear of the Iron Horse saloon now lay directly before them. Through a grimy skylight, they could see into Harlan's private office, where Sheriff Mills sat bound to a chair, his face bruised but his eyes alert. 2 guards flanked him, while Reed paced the room with obvious agitation. "We need to separate Reed from the sheriff," Elizabeth whispered. "He's too dangerous in close quarters." Thatcher studied the layout, formulating and discarding plans with the rapid calculation of an experienced tactician. "There," he finally indicated, pointing to a window in the adjacent storeroom. "That's our entry point, but first we need Reed away from Mills." Reaching into his saddlebag, Thatcher removed a small package wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a mechanical device of unusual design, a clockwork mechanism attached to a small detonator. "Army Corps of Engineers experimental diversion device," he explained, noting Elizabeth's questioning look. "Creates a precisely timed noise distraction without causing actual damage. Should draw attention to the opposite side of the building." "You came remarkably well prepared for a retired marshal," Elizabeth observed. 5 years as a farmer doesn't erase 20 as a lawman," Thatcher replied, setting the timer. "Old habits, always kept a go-bag with essentials, just in case." He positioned the device near a rain gutter, where it would channel the sound toward the street. 3 minutes, be ready to move." The explosion, when it came, sounded far more substantial than the small device should have been capable of producing. Shouts of alarm erupted from inside the Iron Horse as Harlan's men rushed to respond to what sounded like Sullivan launching a major attack on their front entrance. Thatcher moved immediately, using the butt of his Remington to break the storeroom. A window, then clearing the glass before they slipped inside. They navigated through crates of whiskey and tobacco, pausing at the door leading to the main office. "Remember," Thatcher whispered, "in and out. The sheriff is our only objective." Elizabeth nodded, drawing her revolver. "On your mark." Thatcher entered first, moving with such fluid speed that the remaining guard had no time to react before finding himself disarmed and unconscious. Elizabeth secured the door as Thatcher cut Sheriff Mills free from his restraints. "Took you long enough," Mills croaked, his split lip making speech difficult. "Thought you were determined to remain uninvolved. In Valley affairs, plans change," Thatcher replied, helping the sheriff to his feet. "Can you walk?" Mills nodded grimly. "Harlan had questions about you, very specific questions that someone must have fed him. When I couldn't provide answers, Reed decided to encourage me." He gingerly touched his bruised face. "They're planning something big, Thatcher. Something involving the northern mines and a shipment coming in tomorrow night." "We know," Elizabeth interjected, "but first we need to get you somewhere safe." Their exit was considerably more complicated than their entrance. The diversion had drawn most of Harlan's men to the front of the building. but Reed had remained. Suspicious enough to position additional guards at the rear exits, they were forced to return to the rooftop, helping the injured sheriff navigate the difficult terrain as they retreated toward the church. "Wait," Mills hissed as they reached the mercantile roof. "Look there." Through the smoky haze, they could make out 3 well-dressed men entering the banker's residence, a neutral structure that had thus far remained untouched in the conflict. Even from a distance, their bearing marked them as outsiders, city men with expensive suits and the confident posture of those accustomed to power. "The territorial officials," Elizabeth whispered. "No," Mills corrected. "Those men aren't from the territorial office. That's Sebastian Holloway and his associates." Thatcher's expression darkened at the name. Holloway Mining Consortium. They were behind the Cameron County land war and 6 other disputed territories across 3 states, Mills added. "They operate the same way every time. Identify valuable resources, manipulate local conflicts to destabilize ownership, then swoop in to restore order with territorial backing. By the time anyone realizes what's happened, they've secured all legal rights to the resources." "The letter," Elizabeth said, suddenly turning to Thatcher. "If the governor authorized you as a special investigator, then Holloway has either manipulated the territorial government or circumvented it entirely," Thatcher finished. "Either way, stopping a local dispute won't be enough. We need evidence linking Holloway directly to this manipulation." They resumed their journey to the church, minds racing with the implications of this new information. Dr. Patterson helped them inside through a side entrance, immediately tending to the sheriff's injuries, while Thatcher and Elizabeth conferred in the vestry. "Holloway's presence changes our approach," Thatcher said, unfolding the territorial map again. "This isn't just about stopping a local power struggle anymore. It's about exposing a systematic exploitation of territorial law. If Holloway is here personally, whatever they're after must be extraordinary," Elizabeth reasoned. "Far more valuable than just control of a mountain pass or railroad rights." The sheriff joined them, his face freshly bandaged. "It's lithium," he revealed, his voice low, to avoid being overheard by the wounded in the main church. "The northern mines don't just contain silver as everyone believes. Geological surveys recently discovered major lithium deposits, the largest in North America. The mineral's value for new electrical applications has made it more precious than gold to certain industrial interests. And the shipment tomorrow night?" Thatcher pressed documentation, Mills explained. "Holloway doesn't just take control through violence. He ensures everything appears legal. Forged deeds, manipulated mining claims, falsified territorial authorizations. Once those papers are filed with his pet judges, challenging his ownership becomes nearly impossible. Then we need those documents," Elizabeth stated firmly. "Intercept the shipment, secure the evidence, and expose Holloway's operation to the legitimate territorial authorities." Thatcher was already calculating angles and approaches, the tactician's mind fully engaged. "First, we need to stop this conflict before more civilians are caught in the crossfire. Harlan and Sullivan need to understand they're being played against each other." "Harlan won't listen," Mills said flatly. "He's convinced Sullivan is trying to cut him out of the northern claims." "Then we start with Sullivan," Elizabeth decided. "She's more pragmatic. If we can show her evidence of Holloway's manipulation, she might agree to a temporary truce." Their planning was interrupted by the arrival of young Jimmy Porter, who slipped into the church with the wide-eyed excitement of a boy carried along by events beyond his understanding. "Mr. Thatcher, Mr. Chambers is here with his men, 20. Riders at the south edge of town. And there's more news. Reed's men captured one of Sullivan's messengers. They're saying Ms. Sullivan has agreed to meet with Mr. Harlan at midnight to discuss terms, something about dividing territories." The 3 adults exchanged knowing glances. "It's a trap," Thatcher stated. Either Harlan plans to eliminate Sullivan, or Holloway is manipulating both of them into a situation where he can remove both obstacles simultaneously. Elizabeth was already moving toward the door. "I need to warn Sullivan." "Wait." Thatcher caught her arm. "Charging straight to the trading company will only get you shot by Reed's sharpshooters. We need a different approach." He turned to Mills. "Sheriff, can you get word to Chambers? We'll need his men positioned strategically, but out of sight." Mills nodded. "Jimmy can carry the message. Tom will listen." "Good. Tell him to secure the northern road and the bank, but stay hidden until my signal." Thatcher turned back to Elizabeth. "Meanwhile, we're going to visit the banker's residence and have a conversation with Mr. Holloway." "Just the two of us?" Elizabeth asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Thatcher checked his weapons with deadly precision. "Holloway won't expect a direct confrontation. His type prefers to manipulate from the shadows, letting others take the risks. Finding himself face to face with a territorial investigator will catch him off guard. And if he doesn't cooperate?" Dr. Patterson asked from the doorway, his medical bag clutched tightly in hands that had seen too much bloodshed for one day. "Then the ghost will remind him why some legends are best left undisturbed," Thatcher replied, his voice carrying the quiet certainty that had once made hardened criminals surrender at the mere mention of his name. As night fully claimed Coleridge, Thatcher and Elizabeth made their way through the war-torn streets, using shadow and smoke for cover. The banker's residence stood on a small hill overlooking the town, a stately two-story structure with Greek revival pretensions that seemed ludicrously out of place on the frontier. Unlike the other buildings, it was well lit, with lamps glowing warmly behind lace curtains. The appearance of civilized normalcy amid the chaos of the town created an almost surreal contrast, a bubble of refinement floating above the violence below. Two guards at the front door, likely more inside, Elizabeth observed as they crouched, behind a storage shed, studying the approach. "How do you want to handle this?" Thatcher's response surprised her. "We walk up and knock. You can't be serious." Holloway believes himself untouchable, protected by legal fictions and hired muscle. Men like him are most vulnerable when confronted directly with their crimes. He removed the governor's letter from his jacket. "Besides, we have this. Legitimate, territorial authority, which may mean nothing if Holloway has corrupted the territorial government," Elizabeth countered. "True," Thatcher acknowledged. "But he doesn't know what we know, or what evidence we might have already secured. Uncertainty is a powerful weapon against men accustomed to controlling all variables." Elizabeth considered this logic, then nodded her agreement. "Very well, Marshal, let's knock." The guards at the front door were clearly Holloway's men rather than local talent. Their tailored suits couldn't quite disguise the professional alertness in their stance or the military precision of their movements. They straightened as Thatcher and Elizabeth approached openly up the path. "Evening, gentlemen," Thatcher called pleasantly. "Special Territorial Investigator Augustus Gray to see Mr. Holloway. I believe he's expecting me." The guards exchanged uncertain glances, thrown by the confidence of this unexpected visitor and the official tone of his introduction. "Mr. Holloway isn't receiving visitors," the larger guard finally responded, his hand moving subtly toward his concealed weapon. Thatcher's smile never wavered as he produced the governor's letter with its elaborate official seal. "I'm afraid this isn't a social call. Please inform Mr. Holloway that his presence is required immediately on matters concerning territorial authority and mining claim fraud." The calculated gamble worked precisely as Thatcher had anticipated. The guard's eyes widened slightly at the official documentation, and his hesitation created just enough uncertainty for Thatcher to press his advantage. "Unless, of course, you gentlemen would prefer to be charged as accessories to obstruction of a territorial investigation." I'm authorized to make arrests as necessary." He stepped closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Between us, Mr. Holloway isn't the primary target of my investigation. Cooperating individuals often find themselves excluded from prosecution. The psychology was masterful, offering the guards a path that protected both their immediate interests and suggested a future escape from consequences." After a brief, tense moment, the smaller guard nodded to his companion and stepped inside, presumably to inform Holloway of his unexpected visitors. "Impressive," Elizabeth murmured. "Is that how you operated as the ghost? More conversation than confrontation?" "The best resolutions are those achieved without bloodshed," Thatcher replied quietly. "Something I learned too late in my career." The guard returned moments later, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Holloway will see you in the study. This way, please." As they were escorted inside, Thatcher noted every detail of the residence: exits, potential weapons, defensive positions. The interior was ostentatiously decorated with imported furnishings and artwork that seemed designed specifically to emphasize the owner's wealth and sophistication. The study occupied the rear of the first floor, a wood-paneled room dominated by a massive desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves containing volumes whose pristine condition suggested they were for display rather than reading. Behind the desk sat Sebastian Holloway himself, a man whose carefully constructed appearance spoke volumes about his character. At perhaps 50, Holloway cultivated the image of a distinguished businessman, silver temples accenting otherwise, dark hair, a meticulously trimmed beard, and a tailored suit that had clearly never seen the inside of a general store. His smile contained precisely measured warmth as he rose to greet them. "Investigator Gray, what an unexpected pleasure. I'd heard rumors you were in the region, but I was led to believe you had retired from territorial service." His gaze shifted to Elizabeth, assessing and dismissive in the same moment. "And your companion is essential to this conversation," Thatcher replied pleasantly, deliberately leaving her identity ambiguous. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice, Mr. Holloway, particularly given the unfortunate circumstances in town." Holloway gestured toward comfortable leather chairs. "Yes, a regrettable situation. I was actually meeting with local representatives to discuss how our consortium might help restore order. These factional disputes so often hamper economic development in promising regions. How fortunate that you happen to be in Coleridge at precisely this moment," Thatcher observed, his tone neutral but his implication clear. A flicker of calculation crossed Holloway's features before his practiced smile reasserted itself. "Fortunate indeed. Now, how might I assist the territorial office? I assume this concerns the northern mining claims." "In a manner of speaking," Thatcher replied, settling into the offered chair while ensuring his position allowed clear access to his weapons. "I'm investigating a pattern of orchestrated conflicts across the territory, situations where previously stable communities suddenly erupt into violence, followed by convenient corporate acquisition of disputed resources." The trap was set. Thatcher watched Holloway carefully, noting the microscopic tells that betrayed the man's discomfort despite his outward composure. A tightening around the eyes, a slight adjustment of his collar, the briefest pause before. His response, "A concerning pattern indeed," Holloway agreed smoothly, "though I fail to see how this relates to the Holloway Mining Consortium's legitimate business interest in the region." "Perhaps," Elizabeth interjected, "it relates to certain telegrams sent to Victor Harlan regarding the identity of a retired marshal living on a strategically positioned plateau, or to the sudden appearance of bounty hunters with a personal vendetta against said marshal." The first crack appeared in Holloway's facade, a momentary widening of the eyes that confirmed they had struck close to the truth. What followed would determine whether justice could be achieved through conversation, as Thatcher hoped, or whether the ghost would need to emerge once more from the shadow of the farmer. Sebastian Holloway recovered his composure with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to navigating dangerous negotiations. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers as he reassessed the two people before him. "Impressive deductions," he acknowledged, his tone shifting from cordial host to calculating businessman. "Though entirely circumstantial, I'm afraid. Even if such telegrams existed, they could hardly be traced to me or my consortium." Thatcher smiled thinly. "We haven't discussed the Cameron County situation yet, or the remarkably similar patterns in Blue River, Hatchfield and Sterling Hills. 4 communities where local disputes erupted into violence, followed by the miraculous appearance of Holloway Mining Consortium to restore order and secure all valuable resources." A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Holloway's face. "You've been thorough in your farming, Marshal Gray." 5 years provides ample time for research," Thatcher replied, "especially when one suspects that the courthouse massacre that ended one's career might have been orchestrated by the same hidden hand that manipulates frontier conflicts for corporate profit." This clearly unsettled Holloway, though he masked it quickly. "A fascinating theory, but again, circumstantial at best. The territorial courts require evidence, Marshal, not theories." "Which brings us to our present situation," Elizabeth interjected. "Smoothly, a midnight meeting between rival factions, a shipment of falsified documentation arriving tomorrow, and a mining consortium positioned to acquire lithium deposits worth millions once the local powers have eliminated each other." Holloway's eyes narrowed at the mention of lithium. "You appear remarkably well informed for a retired lawman and his associate." "Knowledge is the most valuable currency in our line of work," Thatcher observed. "For instance, we know your consortium has already prepared paperwork claiming the northern mines based on territorial emergency powers that only activate if the local authority structure collapses. We know you've arranged for Judge Parsons, who coincidentally holds shares in your company under his wife's maiden name, to approve those claims without the usual review process." Each revelation struck like a carefully placed bullet, and Holloway's confident facade began showing subtle cracks. His fingers tapped an irregular rhythm on the desk, the first sign of genuine agitation. "What exactly do you want, Marshal?" he asked finally, dropping all pretense of ignorance. "First, you'll send telegrams to both Harlan and Sullivan revealing the manipulation and cancelling tonight's meeting," Thatcher stated, his voice hardening. "Then you'll surrender all falsified documentation your operatives have prepared. Finally, you'll accompany us to Kingston to face territorial charges, including orchestrating the violence that's already claimed innocent lives in Coleridge." Holloway laughed, a cold sound devoid of humour. "A bold proposition from a man with no official standing. Did you think I wouldn't verify your status with the Territorial Office before your arrival?" The real territorial investigator Harrison was quite surprised to learn someone was impersonating him in Coleridge. It was Thatcher's turn to smile, a dangerous expression that transformed his features. "I never claimed to be Investigator Harrison. My authorization comes directly from Governor Wells himself. A special appointment outside normal channels, precisely because your consortium has compromised the usual territorial investigators." He removed the letter again, sliding it across the desk. "Special executive authorization, signed by the governor last month, after connecting patterns of suspicious mining acquisitions across the territory. I was placed here 5 years ago as an insurance policy, a sleeping sentry in case the corruption he suspected ever threatened this region." Holloway scanned the document, his expression darkening as he recognized the authentic signature and executive seal. "This changes nothing. By morning, Harlan and Sullivan will have destroyed each other, and no amount of territorial authority will prevent the emergency acquisition provisions from taking effect. Unless," Elizabeth countered, "those provisions are invoked by a different authority first." She produced a second document from her coat. contingency authorization for Marshall Gray to assume emergency territorial administration of Coleridge Valley in the event of governance collapse. Signed by the governor, witnessed by Judge Ellis of the Territorial Supreme Court, who, unlike Judge Parsons, maintains no hidden financial interests in mining consortiums. For the first time, genuine alarm registered on Holloway's face. "You're bluffing. The governor wouldn't grant such extraordinary powers to a retired marshal. To Augustus Gray, the ghost, the man who broke the Dawson Gang and ended the Henderson County War. The lawman with the highest successful prosecution rate in territorial history?" Thatcher's voice carried absolute certainty. "Governor Wells didn't just grant those powers. He created my entire farming identity as deep cover for this exact scenario. The calculated gambit had its intended effect." Doubt crept into Holloway's expression as he reassessed the situation, mentally calculating odds and outcomes with the precision of a lifelong opportunist. "Even if what you say is true," he said finally, "my men outside this room would ensure you never left to exercise such authority." Thatcher glanced toward the window, where the faint sound of hoofbeats could now be detected. That would be Tom Chambers and his 20 riders taking up positions around this residence, as instructed by Sheriff Mills. Unlike Harlan and Sullivan's men, Chambers has no stake in this conflict, except a profound dislike for outside interests manipulating local affairs. The trap had closed with elegant precision. Holloway recognized defeat in his immediate objective, though his mind was clearly already considering longer-term strategies for damage control. "You present a compelling case for cooperation, Marshal," he conceded with manufactured graciousness. "Perhaps we can reach an arrangement that serves all interests." "The only arrangement on offer is the one I outlined," Thatcher replied coldly. "Telegraph Harlan and Sullivan immediately to cancel the midnight meeting. Surrender all falsified documentation. Accompany us to Kingston to face territorial justice. And if I refuse—" Elizabeth rose smoothly, moving to the window where Chambers' men could now be seen securing the perimeter. "Then, instead of facing charges of fraud and criminal conspiracy, you'll answer for the murders of every civilian caught in today's violence, plus the premeditated assassinations planned for midnight. The territorial gallows haven't been used in 3 years, but I understand the mechanisms remain well maintained." The veiled threat hung in the air between them. After a long moment, Holloway nodded curtly. "The telegraph office, then. Shall we?" Outside, Chambers' men had established an effective perimeter, disarming Holloway's guards with minimal resistance. Tom Chambers himself, a weathered rancher whose perpetual scowl had intimidated more than one would-be cattle rustler, met them. "On the porch. Got your message through Sheriff Mills," he greeted Thatcher gruffly. "Figured it was time someone stood up to these vultures circling our valley. My men have secured the bank and northern road as requested." "Good man," Thatcher acknowledged. "We're escorting Mr. Holloway to the telegraph office. I need 4 of your most reliable men as additional security." As they moved through the darkened streets toward the telegraph office, Elizabeth maintained a vigilant watch for Harlan's or Sullivan's forces. The sporadic gunfire across town had diminished to occasional exchanges, suggesting both factions were conserving ammunition for the midnight confrontation. "They're watching us," she murmured to Thatcher, indicating subtle movements in shadows along the boardwalk. "Word of our procession will reach both Harlan and Sullivan within minutes." "Good," Thatcher replied. "Let them wonder what's happening. Uncertainty disrupts planned operations more effectively than direct confrontation." The telegraph operator, a nervous young man named Jenkins, practically jumped out of his chair when the armed group entered his office. His eyes widened further at the sight of Holloway under escort. "Send these messages immediately," Thatcher instructed, handing over 2 prepared telegrams explaining the conspiracy and cancelling the midnight meeting. Priority transmission to both Harlan at the Iron Horse and Sullivan at the trading company. Yes. Sir, Jenkins stammered, fingers already working the key. While the messages were being transmitted, Thatcher turned his attention back to Holloway. Now, the documentation for tomorrow's shipment. Where is it? Holloway's calculating eyes measured options and outcomes before responding. Already en route, I'm afraid. Special courier departed Kingston this morning. Former military, heavily armed. He'll arrive via the Northern Trail around noon tomorrow. Name and description, Thatcher demanded. Colonel James Montgomery, 6'2", distinguished by a cavalry saber scar across his left cheek, travels with 4 experienced guards, all former soldiers from his regiment. Holloway's smile held a trace of satisfaction. Not men easily deterred, Marshal, even for the legendary Ghost. Thatcher absorbed this information without visible reaction, though Elizabeth could sense his mind already formulating contingencies and approaches. We'll deal with Colonel Montgomery when the time comes. For now, our priority is preventing further bloodshed in Coleridge. The telegraph key clattered to silence as Jenkins finished transmitting the messages. Sent and acknowledged by both. "Parties, sir," he reported. "Miss Sullivan's operator requests her agent make contact urgently." Elizabeth met Thatcher's gaze, silently seeking permission to respond to her employer's summons. "Go," he nodded. "Explain the situation to Sullivan directly. Her cooperation is essential to dampening this conflict. I'll secure Holloway at the church under Chambers' guard and then address Harlan personally." "Is that wise?" she questioned. Concern evident in her expression. "Harlan's men were specifically ordered to eliminate you, which makes a direct approach the last thing they'll expect," Thatcher replied, with the confidence that had defined his career as a lawman. "Sometimes the most dangerous path is actually the safest, provided it's walked with absolute conviction." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, an unspoken current of mutual respect and perhaps something deeper passing between them. "Be careful, Marshal," she said finally. "I'd hate to have to explain to the governor how I lost his secret, agent after just one day of acquaintance." A rare, genuine smile touched Thatcher's lips. "Likewise, Miss Hayes, the Pinkerton agency would surely frown on losing one of their finest operatives to avoidable risk." With Holloway secured at the church under Tom Chambers' watchful eye, Thatcher made his way toward the Iron Horse saloon. The streets remained eerily deserted, except for armed men at strategic positions, both factions maintaining their territories, while civilians sheltered in homes and businesses. He approached the Iron Horse, openly, making no attempt at concealment, a tactic so unexpected it momentarily paralyzed Harlan's sentries. By the time they recovered enough to raise their weapons, Thatcher had already called out, "I'm here to speak with Victor Harlan. I'm unarmed." This last statement was a calculated lie. His Remingtons remained concealed beneath his coat, but it created the necessary impression of vulnerability. After a tense moment of confusion, the Batwing doors swung open to reveal Reed's imposing figure, his perpetual sneer firmly in place, despite the confusion evident in his eyes. "Well, if it isn't the farmer himself," he drawled, though his hand remained tense near his holster. "Or should I say Marshal Gray? Seems you've been keeping secrets from your neighbors." "Necessary precautions," Thatcher replied calmly. "I'm here to speak with your employer about Sebastian Holloway's manipulation of the situation. He's received my telegraph, but I thought a personal conversation might be more persuasive." Reed's harsh laugh held no humor. "Mr. Harlan ain't in a conversational mood, especially with a government man who's been spying on his operations for 5 years. Not spying," Thatcher corrected. "Observing. There's an important distinction. I remained uninvolved until Holloway's people forced my hand by sending bounty hunters to my farm. Now I'm very much involved, and Mr. Harlan would benefit from understanding exactly how and why." Something in Thatcher's tone, the absolute certainty perhaps, or the implicit threat, gave Reed pause. After a moment's consideration, he stepped aside. "Your funeral," he muttered, though there was a new wariness in his gaze as Thatcher passed. Victor Harlan had established his command center in the saloon's private back room, transforming the poker table into a makeshift tactical headquarters. With maps of Coleridge spread across its scarred surface, 6 of his most trusted men surrounded him, their conversations falling silent as Thatcher entered. Harlan himself remained seated, affecting an air of calm control despite the evident surprise in his eyes. At 58, his carefully cultivated appearance of respectability had frayed around the edges during the day's events. His tailored suit now wrinkled, his usually immaculate hair disheveled from running agitated hands through it repeatedly. "Marshal Gray," he acknowledged, making no effort to rise. "Or is it Farmer Thatcher? I'm unclear on which pretense we're maintaining at this point." "Truth would be refreshing for everyone concerned," Thatcher replied, remaining standing despite the empty chair pointedly offered. "Starting with the fact that Sebastian Holloway has been manipulating both you and Margaret Sullivan into a conflict that serves his interests exclusively." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "Your Telegraph made similar claims. Forgive me if I'm skeptical of accusations from a government agent who's been living under false pretenses in my territory for 5 years. Not false pretenses," Thatcher corrected again. "Deep cover, authorized directly by Governor Wells, who suspected Holloway's consortium was corrupting territorial officials to facilitate fraudulent mining acquisitions." He removed the governor's authorization letter, placing it on the table before Harlan. "Read it yourself, then consider why Holloway's representatives arrived in Coleridge precisely when tensions between you and Sullivan were reaching a breaking point over the northern claims." Harlan studied the document with the careful attention of a man accustomed to identifying forgeries. Finding no discrepancies, his expression darkened. "Holloway approached me 6 months ago," he admitted finally. "Offered financing for the railroad, extension to the northern mines in exchange for exclusive shipping contracts. Seemed like a standard business arrangement at the time. And then his people began feeding you information about Sullivan's supposed plans to cut you out of the northern claims entirely," Thatcher surmised. "Just as they were simultaneously telling Sullivan that you were planning to monopolize access to the lithium deposits." Harlan's sharp glance confirmed the accuracy of this assessment. "How do you know about the lithium? Governor Wells has suspected its presence for years. It's why he positioned me here, to ensure that when the deposits were officially discovered, the resulting claims would be processed legally rather than seized through manufactured conflicts and emergency powers." A new calculation entered Harlan's eyes as he reassessed both Thatcher and the situation. "Holloway arranged tonight's meeting, didn't he? Through intermediaries that I assumed were neutral parties. A trap designed to eliminate both you and Sullivan simultaneously," Thatcher confirmed, "creating the governance collapse necessary to invoke emergency acquisition provisions that would transfer all mining rights directly to his consortium." The saloon door burst open before Harlan could respond, admitting an agitated Reed. "Riders approaching from the trading company direction. Sullivan's coming with her core people, but they're not in attack formation." Harlan rose, moving swiftly to the window. "How many?" "Just 6, Reed reported. "Sullivan herself, her brother William, and 4 guards. They're flying a white flag." Thatcher moved to Harlan's side, monitoring the approaching party. Elizabeth must have convinced her of Holloway's treachery. "This is an opportunity, Mr. Harlan, a chance to end this conflict before more lives are lost and before Colonel Montgomery arrives tomorrow with the falsified documentation that would steal the northern claims from both of you." For the first time, something like respect entered Harlan's assessment of Thatcher. "You're suggesting an alliance against Holloway instead of against each other." I'm suggesting that Coleridge Valley belongs to the people who've built their lives here, not to outside interests exploiting local divisions for corporate profit. The next hour witnessed something unprecedented in Coleridge's history. Victor Harlan and Margaret Sullivan, seated at the same table, negotiating territorial boundaries and mutual interests under the supervision of a territorial lawman. Initial hostility gradually gave way to reluctant cooperation as they recognized how completely they had been manipulated by Holloway's machinations. The northern access road can be jointly maintained, Sullivan conceded, indicating a boundary line on the map. With shared costs and proportional usage rights based on production volume. Acceptable, Harlan agreed, though his expression suggested the concession physically pained him. Provided your freight operations deliver our ore at the same rates. You charge your own mining interests. Fair market rates for all parties, Sullivan countered, verified quarterly by an independent assessor approved by both operations. Elizabeth caught Thatcher's eye across the table, a subtle smile acknowledging the remarkable transformation occurring before them. Local rivals finding common ground against outside manipulation. Precisely the outcome Governor Wells had hoped to facilitate when positioning his sleeping sentry in Coleridge 5 years earlier. As dawn broke over the valley, a fragile peace had been established. Joint patrols of Harlan's and Sullivan's men circulated through town, extinguishing remaining fires and assisting civilians emerging from their shelters. Dr. Patterson, overwhelmed with patients during the night's violence, found himself suddenly supported by medical personnel from both factions. Thatcher stood on the Iron Horse's balcony, watching the town slowly reawaken when Elizabeth joined him. Remarkable transformation, she observed, genuine admiration in her voice. From open warfare to cooperative rebuilding in less than 24 hours. The Ghost's reputation for conflict resolution appears well earned. Peace is always possible when people recognize their true common interests, Thatcher replied, though satisfaction was evident in his tone. Harlan and Sullivan are pragmatic business operators beneath their territorial posturing. Once Holloway's manipulation was exposed, cooperation became the logical strategy. And now, Elizabeth asked, studying his profile in the morning light, Colonel Montgomery arrives with the falsified documentation at noon. Holloway remains in custody at the church. What's your plan for concluding this operation, Marshal? Thatcher's expression hardened with renewed purpose. Montgomery's arrival provides the final opportunity to secure concrete evidence linking Holloway to judicial corruption and fraudulent territorial filings. With that evidence, Governor Wells can move against the entire conspiracy rather than just its Coleridge component, a dangerous confrontation, Elizabeth noted. Montgomery's military background makes him a formidable opponent, especially with 4 experienced soldiers accompanying him. Thatcher's smile held grim confidence. Which is why I've arranged a welcoming committee he won't expect. Harlan's, men positioned alongside Sullivan's, with Tom Chambers' riders securing the outer perimeter. 3 factions unified against a common threat, with the territorial authority of the Ghost providing legal foundation for their actions. The trap was set with precision that would have impressed even the most experienced military tactician. Sullivan's scouts provided early warning of Montgomery's approach, allowing Thatcher to position his unified force strategically along the northern trail. When the colonel and his guards rode into the natural bottleneck 3 miles from town, they found themselves suddenly surrounded by overwhelming force. To his credit, Montgomery recognized the futility of resistance immediately. A career military man, he assessed the tactical situation with professional detachment before raising his hands in surrender. Impressive deployment, Marshal Gray, he acknowledged, correctly identifying the architect of his capture. Holloway assured us you'd been eliminated before our arrival. Holloway overestimated his understanding of the situation, Thatcher replied, urging his horse forward to face Montgomery directly. "The documentation, Colonel. Hand it over voluntarily, and this remains a matter of civil fraud rather than armed conspiracy against territorial authority." Montgomery considered his options before reaching slowly into his saddlebag and withdrawing a sealed portfolio. No point dying for Holloway's schemes. The man's never faced a bullet himself. Why should his hired help sacrifice themselves for his profit? The portfolio contained exactly what Thatcher had anticipated: forged mining claims, falsified judicial authorizations, and emergency acquisition orders prepared for Judge Parsons' signature. Most damning of all was a complete organizational chart of the conspiracy, including territorial officials compromised through bribes, blackmail, or promises of future positions within the consortium. "Holloway's thoroughness becomes his undoing," Elizabeth observed as they reviewed the documents at the sheriff's office. "With this evidence, Governor Wells can dismantle the entire operation and restore legitimate governance to 4 territories that have suffered under Holloway's manipulations," Thatcher added, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Cameron County, Blue River, Hatchfield, Sterling Hills, and now Coleridge. 5 communities that can finally emerge from manufactured conflicts into genuine self-determination." Sheriff Mills, his injuries bandaged but his authority restored, studied Thatcher with undisguised curiosity. "The question remains, what happens to Augustus Gray? Does the legendary ghost disappear again once his mission is complete, or does he remain to help rebuild what nearly was destroyed?" It was the question Thatcher himself had been contemplating since the confrontation at his farm had forced him to reclaim his true identity. 5 years of peaceful farming had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Teaching, patience, nurturing rather than destroying, building rather than enforcing. Augustus Gray's official mission is complete, he acknowledged. But Isaac Thatcher has roots in this valley now, crops that need tending, a community worth protecting. His gaze shifted briefly to Elizabeth before returning to the sheriff. "Perhaps there's room for both identities to coexist, the farmer who creates and the lawman who preserves." 3 days later, Sebastian Holloway departed Coleridge under heavy escort, bound for the territorial capital to face justice for conspiracy, fraud, and inciting violence. Colonel Montgomery and his men accompanied him as cooperative witnesses, having negotiated reduced sentences in exchange for comprehensive testimony against the larger conspiracy. At the edge of town, the procession passed Thatcher's wagon heading in the opposite direction, loaded with supplies for his farm. Elizabeth Hayes rode alongside, her position with Sullivan's organization having evolved into a new role as liaison between the formerly rival factions, now working to establish stable governance in the valley. "The northern pass looks different. In morning light," she observed as they reached the base of the trail leading up to Thatcher's plateau, "less foreboding than during our escape from the bounty hunters." "Perspective changes everything," Thatcher replied, guiding his team of horses up the familiar path. "What once seemed an isolated defensive position now feels more like a watchtower protecting the valley below." As they crested the final rise, the plateau stretched before them, his fields partially trampled from the confrontation with Dawson's men, but still viable with proper care. The cabin stood solid and welcoming against the backdrop of mountain wilderness beyond. "It needs work," he acknowledged, noting Elizabeth's assessment of the damage. "But good soil recovers with proper tending. Nature is remarkably forgiving that way." "Unlike people," she suggested, dismounting near the cabin. "Some people," Thatcher corrected, securing the wagon. "Others understand that redemption requires opportunity. Governor Wells gave me that chance 5 years ago. The opportunity to build something honest after years of violence and conflict, even while serving a greater purpose. Elizabeth studied him thoughtfully. And now, with Holloway's conspiracy exposed and the valley returning to peace, what purpose guides Augustus Gray? Or is it Isaac Thatcher who decides what comes next? Thatcher gazed across his fields toward Coleridge in the valley below, considering the question that had occupied his thoughts since confronting Holloway in the banker's residence. "Perhaps neither name fully captures who I've become," he said. Finally, "The ghost taught me how to stand against injustice. The farmer taught me why it matters to build rather than merely defend. Together, they might create something new, something better than either could achieve alone." He turned to face her directly, his expression more open than she had yet witnessed. "The question is whether that journey interests you, Miss Hayes. Pinkerton's finest operative surely has more exciting assignments awaiting than monitoring the recovery of a small mountain valley." Her smile held warmth that belied her professional composure. "I've discovered that excitement is overrated compared to purpose, Marshal, or should I say, farmer. Either way, I find myself surprisingly invested in seeing how this particular valley's story continues to unfold." As evening settled over the Blackridge Mountains, two figures stood on the plateau overlooking Coleridge Valley. Below, the glow of rebuilding efforts was visible even at this distance. Lanterns illuminating repair work, new construction beginning where damaged structures had stood, the community renewing itself after narrowly avoiding destruction. "It's worth protecting," Thatcher observed quietly. "Not just the land or the resources, but the possibility of what people can build together when not manipulated into conflict." "Is that what the legendary ghost has discovered in his second life?" Elizabeth asked. "That building matters more than hunting?" "Perhaps what I've discovered," he replied, his gaze still fixed on the distant lights below, "is that true justice isn't achieved through confrontation alone, but through creating communities worth defending in the first place." The farmer who had learned to be a protector and the lawman who had learned to nurture, both identities now integrated into something stronger than either could have been separately. As darkness claimed the valley, Isaac Thatcher led the way back to his cabin, leaving the ghost's shadow behind while carrying forward the strength it had provided when most needed. The rugged farmer who had been threatened for his land had revealed his deadly shot, but in doing so, had found a purpose greater than either identity alone could have achieved. And in the valley below, a community began healing, not despite the conflict that had nearly destroyed it, but strengthened by the unity that had ultimately saved it from those who had underestimated both the farmer and the people he had chosen to protect. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.